Hi, welcome to the Fred Minnick Show. Ordinarily, I talk about whiskey and music and how those two artistries kind of come together from time to time. But the world doesn't need that conversation right now. A lot of things are happening. A lot of people are hurting. A lot of people don't feel like they have the right, their rights are being taken away. But I believe in this country. I believe in us. And I believe in the people that are on this panel with me right now. We're all in the whiskey business in one way, shape, or form. And the whiskey business is one of those that it was a part of slavery. It was a part of some of the worst things in American history. But it's fought through it. And today is a lot better than it was 15 years ago from a diversity conversation. And I believe in the bottom of my heart, that's because of great men and women fighting for diversity within an industry that greatly needed it. I'm not going to introduce people around the horn like I normally would. Everybody will be introduced as we come and talk. You will see their names below. And in the comment section, pinned at the very top, you will find a GoFundMe page. You'll find it being pushed throughout the chat as well. Please click on that. With us is Chris Montana from Denord Spirits, whose business was badly damaged in the Minneapolis riots. That money is going to go directly to help him and his fellow businesses around that area. And Fawn Weaver is joining me. She's the founder of Uncle Nearest. Fawn, we've done a lot of things when it comes to diversity over the years, but this one somehow, this feels more important. Yeah. This just feels more important, if I'm going to be honest.
I think it's the most important. And I right before this, every morning when I get dressed, I have a playlist, and my playlist is all gospel music. So it's a little bit of Kirk Franklin and a little bit of Tasha Cobbs and a little bit of Fred Hammond, and that is how I start my days. And I was getting dressed for this, and I did what I always did, and I had on my playlist, and then all of a sudden a song I know I have not heard in at least 30 years popped into my head. And it's an old Christian song, an old gospel song by the Clark sisters. And it is A Balm in Gilead. There's a balm in Gilead. And so I just kept hearing in my head, there is a balm in Gilead. And what I knew immediately is I was going to be channeling my father today. And the reason why I'm going to kind of try to disappear and speak from the heart of my dad is because to understand what he was able to get through and how he was able to remain optimistic and then pass on his optimism to me. Ironically, I didn't even know a lot of what he had gone through during the civil rights era because he never talked about it. It wasn't that he was avoiding it. It was that he was so about hope and progress and love and grace. And I remember when Clay was writing a piece on me for the New York Times, and Clay told me to remember this. He sends me an email, and it is a New York Times obituary on my father. And he said, "Is this your father? And if so, is it true that he was kicked out of Southern University for participating in a sit-in?" And I responded to him immediately and said, "I'm pretty sure your journalists have this wrong. My father never went to Southern University, and I only knew that he was, Motown, Detroit. Then he moved to LA. Their story had him starting in LA, going from Louisiana to LA, and then going to Detroit to be with Berry Gordy." And I was like, "Whoa, this is all off." And so I called my mother and I said, "Hey, Mom, can you read this?" And she read it and she's like, "Yep, that's completely accurate." Huh? How could I grow up in a home and never know this. And then I had to begin thinking about and putting all the different pieces together, that even though he didn't focus on what was wrong in our country, he always did something about it. So I began thinking about my life and growing up, and that we always had all the Motown people in, and Smokey and Stevie and all the rest of that guys, but I never thought of myself as a Motown person. I thought of myself as a preacher's kid. He gave up Motown to go into ministry the year I was born. So I was always a preacher's kid. And I remember just seeing all of these people around. They weren't around to be celebrities. And the reason why I didn't look at them as celebrities is they came to my father for counseling. Anything, marriage counseling, life counseling, whatever it is, he was everybody in Motown's pastor. That's how I knew my dad. And so when I remember seeing the pictures, and they began coming back to me as before this, I remember seeing the pictures around the home, and there was one of We Are the World, when Stevie and Smokey and Lionel Richie and all these guys got together. And I remember my dad was a part of it, but I didn't really think about the backstory to it. Well, they were doing that to raise money for what was going on in Africa and with the AIDS virus. But I didn't remember until just a few moments ago that the reason why they were there is because my father started an organization called BARAC, Black American Response to the African Crisis. Then he went one by one to every celebrity friend he knew and said, go to Africa with me. So our pictures, walls had pictures of him and all these celebrities, and he's bringing them through Africa to understand what was going on there so that they could come up with a solution, come back to America and figure out, how do we do this? And then we had We Are the World. And I had to think, so he's at Southern University in Louisiana. He is involved in a civil rights demonstration. They kick him out. This is a man who picked cotton in the fields of Texas, goes to Southern to try to become better. He gets kicked out, goes to LA, and still remains hopeful. And he starts writing gospel music. And Berry Gordy heard that music there and brought him out to Detroit. Then Detroit riots happen, 1967. And Barry sends my dad to LA and Hal Davis and Mark Gordon and said, go open the LA office. This isn't going to still be here after these riots. What we're looking at right now is those riots again. And people know me, and when everyone writes articles about my upbringing, the articles that they write are as like I'm a Motown kid, which I am. But what most people don't know is I left home when I was 15 years old. I lived in homeless shelters. I spent my 18th birthday in a homeless shelter because I was so independent that for my parents that were Christian and in ministry, having this independent child who always wanted to question, who is God? Why do I believe this? Why do you believe this? I don't believe it. It didn't work in that kind of setting. But in growing up, not only did I grow up in those years in homeless shelters and spend my 18th birthday in a homeless shelter, my 19th birthday in a homeless shelter, but before I got to the homeless shelters, I had moved into Watts. That's home of Jordan Downs is where I was. Those projects, home of the Grape Street Crips right across from the Nickerson Garden, the Bounty Hunter Bloods. That's my experience growing up. And when I lived in Watts, Watts was still trying to come back from the Watts riots that happened 20 years prior. Buildings that had been burned then still had not come back. You had this amazing record label that still is the biggest record label that African Americans have ever had, Motown, that had to leave its home of Detroit, where it was surrounded by all African Americans, and move to LA and to be in Beverly Hills. And in that area, we ran Motown out of Detroit. We ran so many people out of watts. And in the middle of it all, my father always had hope. And so when Fred reached out to me yesterday morning on text very early, and he says, I want to do something for Denord. And I think, Fred, you probably had just seen that I had given to Denord and was asking for our whiskey family, our Uncle Nearest whiskey family, to also give to Denord. And he reached out to me and I said, yeah, but it's got to be about hope, because there's enough anger, enough frustration. We have to be about the business of hope. And our industry, the reason why I love this industry and I am so proud of this industry is I've only been in it for 4 years. And to see what has happened in that time is unbelievable to me. So when Fred said, who do you want to be on the panel? Every person who's on this panel is who I asked to be here, who I wanted to be here. And I will tell you why. And I'm going to go one by one. And then Fred, I'm going to kick it back over to you because you probably have questions and I've taken up way too much time. I asked for Tracy Franklin with Glenfiddich. Tracy, do I pronounce that right? Is it Glenfiddich?
Glenfiddich.
Okay, Glenfiddich. It's a great scotch, that much I know. I asked Tracy because Tracy has so much light. And I wanted that light to be a part of this. And what I've seen her do in this industry in the period of time that she's been in it, I am so impressed. And I love watching her light around us, because what she's doing just by her presence, and Tracy, I'm going to say this to you, what you were doing just by your presence is you were reminding our industry how beautiful we are with so much color. And the more color we add to it, the more diversity we add to it, the more beautiful this industry becomes. Then Clay, who I don't see on my screen because I think we moved it around, I asked for Clay because Clay is the reason I'm in this industry. It was his article on Nearest Green and Jack Daniel that even brought me into this industry and to uncover this remarkable story that now that I know all of the pieces, I can say without question, without doubt, is a story of love and hope and honor that if we can replicate it in this period of time, it is going to be remarkable. You have an African-American, formerly enslaved man, a young white orphan kid that come together and create this relationship that everyone around would have been saying negative things to Jack about his proximity to African Americans. Why are you lifting them up? Why are you around them? And I can just imagine how that had to feel for him to be white and to go against so many people. And I know a lot of people in America that are white are having to deal with that right now. And so to take that story and to know Jack Daniel became this extraordinary human being that refused to leave his friend behind, I think is remarkable. And so because Clay is the reason I know that story, and he's been writing on this for a very long time, I wanted Clay. And then Freddy Johnson with Buffalo Trace. It's just because I fangirl every time I see him. I turn into like a little kid and I'm like, Freddy! So, you know, the Buffalo Trace people, every time they see me, are like, whoa, back off of him a little bit. And then Dr. Torrence, the president of Motlow College. Dr. Torrence, when I came to him, I reached out to both Fred and I reached out to Clay and I said, guys, I really want for our first master distiller to be African American. Is there anybody in the pipeline? Is there any master distiller that's African American right now? And the only one we could come up was with you, Chris. And I met you and I had a really good feeling you weren't interested in leaving Minneapolis for Tennessee. So that wasn't going to work. And so I reached out to Dr. Michael Torrence, the president of Motlow College, and I said, if Nearest Green Foundation and Uncle Nearest will underwrite a Nearest Green School of Distilling to introduce people into this industry that I have absolutely come to love, can we house it at Motlow State College? And it's the largest college here in Tennessee by population in terms of the number of students. And he said immediately, without question. We can impact change just by doing this. And so that is how I ended up with each of you and asking each of you to come on, is because I believe that this conversation can be a balm in Gilead. It can be hope by pointing to what we have been able to do in our industry and continue to do every day, where we live and walk right next to each other. I'm missing Melvin. That's what it is. I'm like, why am I missing? Melvin's not on my screen. And Melvin, he is, I remember the first time I met Melvin, because 3 of Nearest's descendants still work at Jack Daniel. And they kept talking about their boss, who they love, and Melvin Keebler. And then he sent it over to me and he said, yeah, he's the VP over at Jack Daniel Distilleries, the AGM. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I met him. I was like, you Black. I had no idea, because I was coming into this industry and thinking there were no people at the top who were Black. And so I reached out to Melvin and I said, I know you don't like to do press, but can you come out of hiding for this? Because I think our industry is more colorful than people realize. So that's it. I just wanted to kind of set the stage, because I know when people are looking at this with everything that's going on, if we started off and just began talking about hope, then people might think we're disconnected. We're not disconnected. We are right in the middle of it. But I just happen to believe that our industry can be at the forefront of bringing this country together as we bring in more diversity and we continue to unify within our industry. I think we can affect change in every other industry because of it. So sorry.
Thanks for that, Fawn. I mean, I think, but that's beautiful. That was a beautiful introduction, and we need to hear that. We need to hear of, from people who were there in the 60s. And, I hope that we don't have this again in 20 years. That's why we're doing this. But we're not doing this because, we didn't have anything to do. We're doing this because we are passionate about this country, and we believe in what this industry is doing from a diversity perspective. And Chris Montana, everybody, Chris has suffered a lot through this. And I'm just going to ask you, Chris, how are you? How are you doing?
Well, first of all, I'm glad we could get this group together. I think it's important to do these things and get some perspective. Your question is difficult to answer. I almost have to compartmentalize myself. I think I'm doing as well as can be expected. Nobody wants to see. I have 3 kids, and we jokingly talk about Denord as my 4th kid. And no one wants to see their baby burn. And that's hard. It's very hard. And when I came here and the sprinklers were going off and there's smoke coming out of the building, and, we ended up, had to try to put some of these fires out. And, I'm not going to try to tell you that I wasn't crying then and haven't on a fairly regular basis since then. But, if as a father, to be honest, setting the business aside, if there's a part of me that is down, that's the part of me, because at one point I'm going to have to, my kids, when I look at them, my oldest is 6, I have 6, 4, and 2. When I look at them, they're just so innocent and so perfect. And so much of this is so dirty. And it hurts me to know that I'm going to be the one to bring that to them. There's another side though. And that other side, I think, it's appropriate. We're talking about hope here. That other side is very hopeful. I've done some of these interviews and people have asked me, this is senseless. And I'm like, well, that's one way to look at it, but there's a reason behind it. If it were truly senseless, there would be no reason behind it. There is a latent anger that's there, and there's a propellant, and that propellant is fatigue. We've seen this too much. And here we're talking about George Floyd, but you can go back every year and we can insert a new name there. And so I understand why it's happening. I don't condone the violence, but I understand it. And something's going to come from all of this. And that's what I'm hopeful about. Every time that we have these moments, we think, well, maybe this is the one. And I think that we get, it's almost like we are the boys who cried wolf, and eventually you get fatigue from that. We're like, we want this to be the last one. If you look within a mile radius of my business, everything was on fire. I mean, it's all gone. The libraries, the police station's gone. We're in the same block as a 3rd precinct. So we're literally in the epicenter of the protest. This is where it started. It's all gone. But there's a King quote, which I will butcher, but it basically is, and it's oft repeated, that, the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward, or the arc of time or humanity or the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think it bends because good people push. And there are a lot of good people pushing. The news is about the riots, but if you would have seen the peaceful protest that was 95% of what people went out to do, everybody was there. Everybody were there. Young people were there. Black people were there. White people were there. We have a large Native community. The Native community was there. The Somali community was there. The Eritrean community was there. The Hmong community were there. Everybody was there. And they were all saying the same thing. I had a friend of mine that went to law school. I used to work in Congress for a Democrat. That tells you all you need to know, but he's very conservative. He sent me a text and he said, I remember when you opened up about how difficult some of the regulations were and how it's making you rethink some things, not all things, but some things about beliefs that you held that were given to you by your parents and whatnot. He's like, I'm looking at the posts that you've put out there, and I'm looking at what's happening here, and it's making me rethink some of the things that I grew up with in rural Minnesota. And I have been, and rallies are important. Most everyone at that rally agrees. The tough thing is the people who aren't at the rally. And when we get to the point where those people are on board, and if you see signs that those people are on board, that's how change actually happens. That's what change looks like. The whole point of it is that you move from where you were to a new place. And it's not that you get up and I'm not saying that people shouldn't go out and go to rally. I think it's important. I was out there. But it's how do we create a space when something like this happens that can be filled by not just the people who are on the same page as to this moment, what it means and how it impacts a particular community, but how can we also create a space that other people who weren't necessarily of the same mind can enter and have a conversation. And my fear is that the riots cloud that space. And I hope that that's not where we land. I hope that where we land is this is a moment in time where a few more people start pushing on that arc of the universe. And I think that that's going to happen. I've seen a lot of good things. I've seen a lot of ugly, but I've seen a lot of good things. And we are now working at this point. I mean, the outpouring of support, and I apologize, I know I'm running on and on, but the outpouring of support that has, I've been doing a lot of crying, but a lot of it has been because I am so humbled. I am so absolutely humbled. And we're going to be okay. I cannot tell you right now because we're still in the middle of this thing. If the building I'm in right now is the original distillery, I don't know if it's going to be standing in a few days. We have so many threats against us, it wouldn't shock me at all if it was burned to the ground. But we're going to come back. One way or the other, we're going to come back. We are supported and we feel that support. I am very concerned about the other businesses around me because we are not strong unless they are strong. And so I'm so happy to be able to be here to talk with all of you and to shine some light on this effort that is not just about Denord. Denord is one business. It's one very near and dear to my heart, but it's one business. But there's a whole ecosystem of businesses here about which people might make assumptions. Oh, they must have insurance. They must have this kind of support or that. It's not always true. And we're going to lose a lot of those businesses. And so this effort that I'm pouring everything I can into is to make sure that while we survive, we have others who survive with us. So that way this doesn't just become a wasteland. And it doesn't, or that it doesn't get redeveloped and it's just a bunch of condos and chain stores. We want to bring back those small businesses that were, you know, in this case, particularly focused on those Black and brown businesses, because they revitalize this area and they're all gone, every single one of them. So thank you for having me. I know that's a very long answer to how are you doing. And I apologize if people come in and out. We're in the middle of we now have transformed the distillery into a food and supply depot. And there are, as we speak, there are thousands of people outside of our facility who are coming to get supplies. And I feel like even more who are coming to drop them off. So it doesn't make for very good video, but I'll apologize in advance, but I'll stop talking. Thank you for doing this.
First of all, you have no reason to apologize, my friend. No reason whatsoever. And, you know, if anything, you know, what Fawn was talking about with hope, if there is ever someone who embodies hope, Chris, it's you. You have been through I mean, you've lost so much. And you're talking, I mean, I'm a father. I can't imagine having that conversation with my 6-year-old. I can't imagine the conversations you're going to have. And you're still trying to help people. You're turning your facility over that you don't even know if we'll be there in a few days. And you're taking advantage of your spot to help others. If that doesn't give you hope, folks, if that doesn't give you hope, I don't know what does. But God bless you, Chris. God bless you. And
thank you, Fred.
You, and again, everybody who's listening or watching, go to the YouTube at the top, at the comment section. There is a pinned GoFundMe page, and click on that. Donate whatever you can, You know, Chris is out there raising money for his fellow businesses. And, you know, it doesn't, I don't care. Our country, we need more leaders like you, Chris. We need more leaders like Fawn. We need these leaders out there talking. And you know what? We need people who aren't afraid to stand up and talk. And that is what gives me hope. Now, the next question I'm going to ask is to Clay Rising. Clay's the deputy editor for the New York Times, but he's also written heavily on civil rights. Clay, from a historic standpoint, through everything that you have, you know, that you've written about and studied in the civil rights movement, how does today compare to the Martin Luther King era in terms of bringing about the change that we need, that hope that Fawn and Chris were talking about?
Well, thank you very much, Fred, for having me, and I'm humbled and honored to be here with y'all. Just to your question, I think that there are lots of differences, lots of similarities, but the thing that I focus on is what comes next. And, you know, a lot of what happened in the 60s was a lot of promise, followed by a lot of, you know, failures, particularly on the part of political leadership, federal and state leadership, to follow up on, you know, some of the commitments made in things like the Civil Rights Act and the War on Poverty, and to respond to some of the violence that broke out after police brutality events in Watts and Detroit, and obviously after the King assassination. And so, you know, when I look at the last couple of days and think about what are the parallels, the one thing that I think about is what do we learn to do differently this time? And I think part of that is bringing in a different way of thinking about how do you build strong communities. Obviously, that means part of that is government support, and it is police reform, but it's also standing aside and supporting business leaders and community leaders at really the grassroots level, giving them the support they need, but also giving them the room they need to create communities, to create business communities that are not tied to some quarterly corporate balance sheet or to private equity or to, sources of, financial institutions that don't necessarily have a buy-in into communities. There's a place for groups like that if they are truly bought in. But I think that we as a country, and we as thousands of small communities, within big cities, off on their own, wherever you are, we need to spend the next couple of months, the next couple of years, talking about how do we build differently. Because I think that you can't disaggregate all of the problems that people are responding to. It's kind of all one thing that comes together in despair and anger. But I think you can pinpoint individual things, and you can talk about the sense of despair and hopelessness in individual communities, and you can start to respond to that, and you can find ways to deal with it. Because I think that what we did in the 60s was to identify those things and then really fail to respond to them. And I think this time we can do that better.
Now, Clay, you and I, we've both written a lot about whiskey history. And, if we look at what diversity looked like in the whiskey industry 15, 20 years ago, 30 years before that, I mean, it was almost non-existent. Now look at it. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah,
for sure.
No,
but
absolutely.
From a historic standpoint, I feel like the industry has done a good job. We have several people here who are a part of that, but historically, don't you think it's in a better place than it was?
I do. I think I'll put it this way. I think it's headed in a good direction. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think that, folks like Fawn and Chris are leading the way, but everybody needs to make it easier for folks one of the things that comes down to is, I'm not a distiller, but I know from talking to a lot of people is the immense amount of capital that you need up front, that regulatory know-it-all and how to get over those humps. And certain people with the capital can do that. I think that one of the things that as an industry, the distilling industry can focus on is, how do you lower some of those barriers? Because there are a lot of people out there, particularly in communities of color, that would love to do more distilling, and yet and this is just my impression, obviously. But you look at those people in those communities, they look at those hurdles, and they're pretty high. So I think one thing that we can push for is either regulatory relief or just different sources of capital to help people be able to set up a still, to be able to set up a marketing operation, to get product to market in a way that can really make distilling even more a foundation of a community and of a business community. I think that that's another way that the distilling industry has come a long way. With all due respect to the big guys out there, I'm heartened by the expansion and the perseverance of small distillers and the way that they've become keystones of their communities. And unfortunately, that still is a very racialized thing. You see that a lot in white communities. You don't see it enough in communities of color. And yet, as you said, the industry is doing a great job of pushing forward, and I think that's one way to clear that path.
And one of the true longtime champions of diversity of this industry is Tracy Franklin of William Grant. Tracy, how you doing?
I'm good. So I feel I'm here today for that light, like Fawn said. I am here as Spirited Tracy. I'm here with the goal to create change based in positivity, based in joy. We're still angry. We're still hurt. We're still sad. I acknowledge all of that out there. But I also have the hope that, just like Chris said, this is the time when we start to lean towards truth. Like, this is the time where we lean towards justice. And I think that is absolutely happening. And that is where my hope lies. And I just hope that this conversation is one step in that direction.
Well, I'm really glad you could join us. And, one of the things that gives me hope about whiskey for a long time has been you, because you have, as Fawn said, you've been a beacon of light, I think was her comment. You are one of the most joyous personalities out there. And, how do you think that like we can take the joy of whiskey? How can we use the joy of whiskey to bring forth, some type of, I guess, some of that light, that light that you're pouring whiskey, you're talking whiskey, you're bringing, you're not there because of diversity. You're there because of your passion. How do we use this? How do we use that momentum, to kind of help the state of things right now? I mean, I know you got a lot of Glenfiddich back there. Is it you gonna start passing that out a little bit, or?
Well, honestly, I don't know that whiskey is necessarily the path for that growth. I think that whiskey for me has been a tool that's helped me spread joy and education and things of that sort. And right now it's even more basic. So I think really what we need to do is just use conversation, and giving people a moment to pause, giving people a moment to breathe. But we really need to be able to allow conversation to change where this path is going, and to really open up a lot of people's minds. Like, if you can't have that conversation, you're never going to get anybody to change their mind. We've been putting a lot of different education out. I have for people to access, and whiskey has, we have our own issues that we deal with. But I think that from when I started, I had a company called Worski, which was all about increasing diversity in the world of whiskey. And when I created that almost 10 years ago to today, there's definitely huge growth happening. And that growth is, I think, reflected in the world in general. And I think if we can look at some of the learnings that we have, and maybe the learnings from the way that the world has become more accepting, the way the world is fighting for that justice, and we just listen, and we open up, and we really start to move in a way that is equitable.
Yeah.
And and I've had those conversations over a glass of whiskey. So while it is definitely it can create conversation. It can create something where you kind of find a common ground. And I think that maybe that is it. It's not about the whiskey. It's about the common ground. So maybe it's art for some people. Maybe it's music for some people. Maybe it's Broadway. Like, it could be whatever it is that you all agree. It could Christianity. It could be whatever, but you find common ground to grow from. So I think I've always had that ability with whiskey to find that common ground, that if you like this, I like this, and then we have something we can grow from and build our friendship on. Those exist throughout our societies. So we have to seek that common ground, I believe.
I mean, I would love right now if everybody heard your advice, Tracy, because that is true. Whether it's sports, it's whiskey, or whatever might your interest be, someone else out there has it, and it's about people. It's about people. I know, Melvin, you've been with Brown-Forman for a while, and your Brown-Forman family loves you. And you know what? When I've talked to people about you, they don't say, "Oh, Melvin's African American vice president over at Brown-Forman." They say it's Melvin. They say you're a guy. No, and I think I almost feel like that's more genuine than just about any kind of governmental effort that could come forward, is if we just treat each other as human. And you're running a major distillery in the South, and everybody looks at Jack Daniels as kind of like, I mean, it's Jack Daniels. It's like it's an amazing product. Everybody knows it. How how have you been able to like carry on the mission of diversity at Brown-Forman and, you know, Jack in particular?
Well, Fred, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm absolutely honored to be here. Thank you, Fawn, for inviting me. And to Chris, you're 100% right. This too shall pass, and we will make it. So I grew up in Selma, Alabama, born and raised there. And so the late 60s, early 70s, some of the things that I saw in elementary and junior high school, I always knew those things left a mark on me. And, you know, you spend your entire life looking at the progress that the country has made and really wanting to cheer for this country. And I will tell you, seeing what's happening here recently, having it, you know, brought to light by body cams and videos says, yes, we have made a lot of progress from what I saw then, but there are some things that resemble it, and we still got a lot of work to do. I joined Brown-Forman, it's been almost 20 years. And when there was not a lot of talk in the industry about diversity, the fact that I was able to join says that there was some elements of at least trying to hire qualified minority candidates, but there was very little discussion around diversity and inclusion and what it means. We were fortunate, probably about a decade, maybe a decade and a half ago, our former CEO, Paul Varga, took an interest and had some foresight in understanding that diversity exists. And if businesses are going to continue to thrive and grow, you have to embrace it, you have to understand it, and you have to put mechanisms in place such that your people understand it. So we embarked on the journey of hiring a chief diversity officer. We went to deep dive training with the leadership because people of color, we definitely need allies in the struggles that we go through. And you have to have that training so people will have a better understanding of how to be an ally. So all the executive leadership team went through unconscious bias training, because it's the little things sometimes that get overlooked, that some people don't even recognize how offensive some things are until they've had an opportunity to be educated on it. That training then went down to from the executive leadership team to senior executives to mid-level managers. And we eventually tried to take it all the way down to the hourly workforce. So to me, you start with educating the people at the very top of the organization. Because like I said, if you look at the makeup of the marches that's out there, I think it's already been said. It's not a black, it's not white, it's people of all colors and genders. And so if you're going to build that into your corporation, you need people of all colors, all genders, fighting together to achieve diversity and inclusion. To me, that's the only way you can do it. One person, one individual, it does not work. It has to be throughout the entire organization. And it has to be a primary focus and a mission of the organization. And then, you know, I looked at how our multicultural marketing group, how it was kind of targeted to a certain specific group. And now it's all inclusive in our marketing, because it is an essential part of your business. You have to be able to talk to people, whether, not just here in the US, around the world, if you are a major corporation, and you have to have people represented on those teams. I'm not going to say that, a Fred can't talk to an African-American group. He most certainly can. It also needs to be an African-American when you're marketing to that demographic. You should not have all of one type talking to and marketing to a specific demographic. So I think Brown-Forman has made a significant amount of progress. And I think we all acknowledge that this industry still has a long ways to go.
Absolutely. And I did not know you grew up in Selma. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for taking us inside, Brown-Forman, because that's a large parent company. And a lot of people don't really give the credit where it's due sometimes. But that story you just shared, I mean, Melvin, if every corporation in America took that template, maybe we're not having this conversation, And Fawn, I think you're muted here. I want to unmute you. What did you
Fred,
say?
I do want to say.
I'm muted, but it's intentional because I'm over here going, yes, yeah, that's right. And I don't want to interrupt everybody with all of mine,
Yeah, I do want to say something. So Fawn and I met. I don't think she's really told the full story. So we have employee resource groups. Fawn has been instrumental in that educational journey for Jack Daniels and Brown-Forman. She has been the primary speaker at several of our, and I want to thank her, because most of the time it's our executive leadership team when someone says, hey, can you reach out to Fawn and see if she can speak to the Build ERG or the Grow ERG? And these are just acronyms for different employee resource groups. She always says yes, or she may not could make the date, but she always says yes, and she always does a phenomenal job. And I think Brown-Forman has made a step change in that educational journey, and it is a lot to do with the work and the partnership that she's had with us. So wow. Thank you.
Well, I think that one of the things we have to remember with our industry, and a part of why I'm so hopeful with what I've seen happen just over the last few years, is the whiskey industry, the American whiskey industry, was all white in terms of the owners, the leaders. And so when you think about all of the brands, it's basically somebody's great grandchild who is currently running it. Well, we don't have anybody that was there to pass it down. And so we would not naturally think that this is an industry for us. And so I think a part of it is we have to, we're kind of at ground zero with Chris, what Chris is doing. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. Will you unmute yourself just for a second? Because I want to make sure I say this correct. Are there any other African-American master distillers in the US right now in whiskey?
Well, I've been looking since we started.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I hear every once in a while of places that are opening up, mm-hmm. but I haven't met them yet.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither. But I think, though, that has a lot to do with, when I think about the different master distillers that are in this business, their grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfathers were in this business. And so they're drawn to the business because of their family legacy. And so what we're doing here, Tracy, Chris, myself, Melvin, this is sort of this is the beginning for us. because we have the ability to be the ones who are creating the generation after generation. We can't go back and change what happened. We can't go back and fix that. But I remember Matthias Melvin over at Brown-Forman. He's your chief brand officer now. He took over from Mark McCallum. And he came and spoke with our team. And it was the first time. I'm always speaking with their team and helping in that regard. It's the first time they came and spoke to my team. And I remember Matthias saying something so powerful to my team. He said, we believe that if Nearest Green all those years ago would have been able to own his own distillery, that he and Jack would have traveled the world, elevating the category of Tennessee whiskey together. And so a part of why I think our two companies learned to really embrace one another is because we realized we owed it to them in order to figure this out, so that because we can't go back and establish, Nearest to have it, but what we can do is we can do it now, and we can have his great-great-granddaughter as the master blender. I tried to get everybody in that family to go to school in order to be the next master distiller. I have no takers, none, because we put them all through college, every single one of them, if they're in college age. And so they're like, let me get this straight. So we can be doctors, lawyers, whatever we want to do. You're paying for us to go all the way to our PhD, and you want us to come run a still? I don't think so. And so I don't have any hope that any of Nearest's descendants are going to be running that still. But we are able to have them run the foundation and run the marketing and all the rest of that. But this is the first generation, and Chris is kicking it off for us. This is the first generation where his children are going to be able to say, I'm in this business because my dad was. And their children are going to be able to say, I'm in this business because my granddad was. And so I don't think, and this is just me personally, I don't represent all the African Americans in the country. This is my personal opinion. I don't think it is our responsibility to go back and to try to figure out what went wrong. We are better spent our time figuring out, how do we now bring in more African Americans? How do we welcome them into this industry? And I think a part of that is them seeing us and saying, this is an amazing industry, and come into it, be at this ground level with us, so that every generation after that, it just grows more and more, where there are more people of diversity. There's so many more women in this now than when I began 3 years ago. It's not even funny, or 4 years ago. And I think every year we're just going to keep getting better and better. I remember my parents' pastor, Dr. E.V. Hill, as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Convention or Conference, the same thing as Martin Luther King. And he then led it, I think maybe the generation after Martin Luther King. And I remember, the only thing I remember that he used to say, because he had the longest church services, I couldn't hear nothing. But the one thing that stuck with me is he said, you can't ripen a peach with a blowtorch. And I think that it's really, really important that we understand that right now we have this enormous ability, because people in this industry, they want to hear from us. Tracy can probably speak to this, Melvin. Within these larger corporations, they're constantly asking us, how can we do better? And we just have to be able to deliver those answers to them. And I think, for Chris, for Denord, I know what we can do better. I know, Chris, if you were distributed in more states, would you be able to meet that demand?
We could, and we've had a slow grow, and now we're at the point, unfortunately, and this is one of the ironies of how these recent days have played out. We thought that our garage space would be the safest place, and so we moved most of our equipment over there, where it was then promptly destroyed. But yes, we've built in a lot of capacity, and if we did have those accounts, we could go there. The trouble with us, and I think this will be the trouble with many businesses that follow us, and there is a point to that I want to make sure that I don't forget. It has to do with what we did with ACSA, but it's when we started, we had so little money. We started a distillery with $60,000, and you know, Fawn, you know this. If anyone came to me now and said they want to start a distillery with $60,000, I'd say go spend that $60,000 on sweet potato pie. Go buy something else because you have no chance. And that was back when we only had, you know, maybe 500 distilleries. We're over 2,000 now. So yes, you know, we have that capacity, but it's a slow burn. It's hard to get out there and to get those resources so that way you can put yourself on a pedestal where people even know that you exist.
So here's the deal. And so I'm speaking to all of my colleagues because I know my colleagues will look at this. I know my colleagues at Brown-Forman will look at this. My colleagues at Diageo will look at this. My colleagues over at William Grant, because Tracy's on here, will look at this. And I am putting out the challenge to RNDC, who has now purchased Young's, and to Southern and whoever else. I mean, we're represented by all of the big guys across the 50 states. I am telling you now, you bring in Denord, we've got to make sure they succeed. This is our first generation African-American master distiller, owned, operated, first one, only one right now. You bring them in, the Uncle Nearest team will fully support it. They will make sure that those pull-through numbers are there, but you gotta bring them in. Bring them in and you have my word, we will support Denord. And I think that those are the things that we are able to do. The question is what do we do? That's what we do. We actually put the action behind it. So Chris, I want you, we're gonna connect after this. I am going to make sure that all of my colleagues, all of the leadership for RNDC, who I love you guys, but I am calling you out on this because I want you guys to take him on and make sure that his kids and their grandkids, that this is a thing that continues in our industry. It begins with this generation. It begins with us. And I'm really, really proud to be a part of that.
And Chris, I'll send me a bottle of vodka. I'll review it.
Well, that's something. Well, that's something. You know, before I'm sure we're short of time, and there's some folks we haven't heard from. I want to, because Fawn, first of all, that is very generous, and you have such a platform, and to offer that platform is huge. And we've spoken before about one of the things I wanted to do within the American Craft Spirits Association. I'm speaking somewhat out of turn because we put this into a strategic planning process that I set up. But I just want to mention it quickly here. We don't see people, we don't see the diversity in the industry. When I went to my first ACSA convention, that was in 2015. So I'd been in operation for 2 years. I walked in the room, I was the only Black person in it. There were over 1,000 people in that room. And that's the reason why I joined the board. That's the reason why for the past 2 years I've been the president. I just handed it off a couple weeks ago. But one of the main initiatives that I worked on while I was the president of the American Craft Spirit Association was to get an internship program together, so that way there would be people who would go work at micro and macro. And they would do that maybe for a year or so and get the skills, because we don't want people to get hired because of what they look like. We want them to get hired because of what they know. And if you look at beer, and this is also happening in spirits, I know a lot of people, there is a circuit. And they move around from one place to another, and eventually they become the master distiller at some place because an opportunity opens up. Well, we have to inject people into that stream, but for injecting those people and being intentional about it, it'll never happen. And so one thing, and I hope that now I'm about to rotate off of the board, but one of the things that I hope that we can do is we can make that, whether it's through ACSA or not, to work with some of these companies, whether it's, mine, I will always offer up Denord, but I also want to work with macro. I want to work with legacy brands to get people those skills so we can get them out into the market and be marketable to these other businesses who are looking to pick them up. There's a shortage of people who know what they're doing. There's a lot of bad products being made because people don't know what they're doing. If we did that and we did it right, we could change incrementally, but those people inspire other people. I just wanted to make sure that I threw that out there to know that that's an effort that is now in the American Craft Spirits Association strategic plan. And it's going to take some pushing, and I won't be there anymore to push it, but it's going to take some pushing to make that into a reality. And I hope that perhaps the people that are on this call will be interested in pushing it with me.
That's awesome. And again, you're a leader. You're a leader. And one thing about our industry is that you all are kind of competitors, and yet we're right here. And if anyone knows like the camaraderie of whiskey, it's Freddy Johnson. Freddy is actually, his grandpa and his pops worked at the distillery. He's in the Bourbon Hall of Fame. And, Freddy, you're one of my favorite people in the world. I love you. It's just not bourbon. You are bourbon. And I know you have a lot to say, so I'll just shut up and let you, let your words of wisdom come on in.
Well, I know about the words of wisdom, but I do have some thoughts. I've been sitting here just listening. I've been so proud of Vaughn and what she has accomplished and what she said. I listened to Chris, and I think about how diverse the two distilleries have been and what they've gone through. And so we have one that sits out in the middle of nowhere that has taken the world by storm. And we have another that was right in the heart of the neighborhood, something that everyone in that neighborhood has been so proud of. And like its location, people actually went out and put up barriers, personally blocking certain areas so that people would not destroy those areas. And as he mentioned, the buildings across the street weren't harmed, but yet his was one of the areas that got targeted. And it hurts. So a couple of things that I want to share that's important to me, but I want you to think about them for me. The first is this, for Chris. Fawn is already aware of how I feel about this. For Chris, the first releases that you put out will be your footprint. And as Fred has experienced in tasting some of these products, that he gets all the hype, he gets all the pressure. Try this, man, try this. We've really produced some really good stuff. And Fred will ask the question, well, how long have you aged it? Oh, about 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 6 months. And I sent him a message one time, because one time I commented to him, I said, Fred, I said, of all the thousands of times I've seen you tasting and reviews of your tastings, it was the first time I've ever seen you spit one out. And his comment was, oh, he said, this is just terrible. So my point to you is this. For Chris, you and Fawn are creating footprints. And you had mentioned your son and your children and the next generation. It's your footprint. Your legacy will determine the output of your contribution and the significance of your product to the industry. Because once you go out the door with it, you are competing with all those other products that are out there. And if you don't nail it, if I don't start off with a good product, people will always remember your rollout. And they will always compare to your rollout. And if it starts off, you might as well kiss it off in this world that we live in, because you'll never get a chance to recover from that. So that was the beauty of my watching how Vaughn rolled out from Nearest. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, boom, these gold medals start rolling in. And everybody's like, where the hell did this whiskey come from? And so part of it was marketing, but part of it is also the personal interface that she had within the industry, networking. So part of it's about a good product, but the other part is how are you relating to those you want to support your product? Because behind the scenes, we don't talk about this, but behind the scenes, everyone talks about everyone else's product. We do personal tastings. I do them all the time. And one of the things that Mark Brown, our president and CEO, shared with me when I first started doing this, the question was, when I came into this, I didn't come into this industry to be a master distiller or to be a national account manager. I didn't come into this distillery to do anything in that manner. My objective was merely to keep a promise to my family. So I had already been through systems engineering. I did network designs for AT&T. I worked with Bell Labs. I did a lot of underground military sites, Air Force One, stuff like that. So when Fred started talking about his military background, I remember being in network operations, all that stuff was going on. And I was part of the backbone network for their communications. I never shared that kind of stuff. We had top secret security clearances. But those are the things that these folks that are down underneath, that are down, as Fred would say, down in the trenches, these are the folks that are your foundation. These are the folks that believe in you, that trust you. And the hope is that you just remember that what you roll out is a footprint. And it's not going to be your product, but what you're building today is actually for the next generation. So your product, at your age right now, you probably will never get to see your third batch of whiskey if it reaches its final maturity and you let it age for about 15 to 20 years. So you have to think about this, but this footprint today, right, you're off and running. And I think what Vaughn's doing right now by basically helping to get her footprint and what Fred is doing with the GoFundMe, it's like, wait a minute, guys, don't go off the deep end. Ride this wave with us because we're with you. Don't feel like you got to roll something out just because there's pressure to roll something out. If it's not any good, you bite the bullet. You look at, here's the comment that I made about, Lord, don't get me started here. But anyway, here's the deal. Clay had made a comment, and his comment was, what comes next? So as you start to rebuild and get the distillery put back together, sure, it looks bad right now, but the question is, what comes next? What have we learned collectively? What have you learned collectively? You made a comment about you decided that you would move all your stuff over to the area, glass, windows, and all of that, and basically it all got destroyed. So what have we learned? You think about some distilleries, especially make distilleries, they're still, and part of their production is a separate entity. They got them deliberately separate from where they're going to store it and where all their other volatile products happen to be. Because it's a business decision. So you have to look at, okay, spacing and how I'm going to set things up. So what I've learned is I can't put all my eggs in one basket because it completely wipes me out. And I was taken aback when I saw you in that little room with all of the stuff around you, and your comment was, these are some of the things we were able to save. What a moment. What a moment. All of this, my heart, my energy, the restless nights, all of this. And I look around in this little room, and these are some of the key things that I've been able to keep that represent the past few years of my life. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with saying this. Sometimes when you meet people and it happens a lot, I'm sure it happens to you too, you meet them for the first time, and after a little informal chit chat, they come out with something like, can I ask you something? When I'm talking to someone that I've not met before, I don't know anything about them, and they come out with, can I ask you something? A little flag always goes up in my mind. And the reason that the flag goes up is it's like what Melvin was talking about, what he went through growing up, and the things that he experienced. So now here we are in a bourbon environment, and out of nowhere, you come up with a question like, can I ask you something? So I learned from my dad and my granddad there's a process here, because when I look at you, the first thing that I basically replay in my mind is, can I trust you enough to give you an honest answer? And you have to think about that, because if I don't know your baggage and I don't know why you're asking this question, I have to be very careful about how you're going to use my response. So as Mark Brown had shared with me, there is no such thing as off the record. No matter who you're talking to, Clay knows exactly what I'm talking about. Is when somebody says off the record, they're setting you up, because you really don't know how that's going to be used. So one of the reasons that this came about, and I got the message from Amy about being on this, I had some flags to go up, because we know Fred. And we know that Fred can ask you some questions sometimes, and you go like, where the hell did that come from? But the other piece of it is, if I do answer you honestly, can you deal with the truth? And will you represent that in an appropriate manner? So one of the reasons that I do things with Fred and with Vaughn is because I do have that trust, that I feel like that, yes, we can talk about things openly. I think that we can make it a better place. And Fred, you had made a comment about 20 years from now, you know, we would hope, like Clay had said, we would hope that we wouldn't be having a discussion like this 20 years from now. In my view, I say, I hope that 20 years from now, we do have another conversation like we're having now. And the kicker is how much it has changed based on this window that we have created today.
Beautiful.
So I'm just telling you, for me, the game changer in the last couple of days was, with all the other turmoil that was going on, the police that were kneeling down in Michigan with the protesters. And that whole thing got diffused because they did that. And at another location, the police got with the protesters and they started to do chants, they started to shout, they basically bonded, and the whole thing dispersed. That group completely went away and no one was harmed, which shows you that inside of us, there is a good spot. And all we have to do is be strong enough and brave enough to open it up and let people see that, yeah, I've got some rough edges, but it doesn't mean that we can't make them better. It just means that my baggage put me where I am today. So you help me, I'll help you, and maybe 20 years from now, I might be in a rocker and I might be a little rascal scooter. But 20 years from today, hopefully, we can have this same conversation again, and it'll be everybody happy. We'll be talking about how great Chris's whiskey is and how it's gone all over the country and how fun. Begin to get the picture. So for Melvin and for some of us that have been around, gone up through this next generation that we see unfolding in front of us is beautiful. And I'm going to close with this. Technology, if 20 years ago, the technology that basically displayed the behavior, the bad behavior of a lot of people, just like this influx of people that are coming in that are creating all of this mess, well, all been captured on camera now. So the technology has allowed us to not let what happened 20 years ago be pushed under the carpet. Now it's out, it's everywhere. Now it's like, okay, that was a game changer for all of us. And people are saying, wait a minute, this camera can actually be my friend. When I see something going on, not only can I verbally say something, I can document that. And it's proof that, oh, this really did happen. So now let's see how we can make this better. Okay, so I'm going to close with that. And I appreciate y'all letting me have the time to kind of like say what's on mind. My objective is to just touch lives and basically in my little country bumpkin kind of way, just to know the world can be a better place, but where you put your foot has a lot to do with the people that are going to follow you. And if you put a bunch of poop, don't expect a lot of people to follow you, because you're going to get a very small group of folks. But I think that the footprint that Fred's podcast, the footprint that Vaughn's done, the text messages, the inner communications that we've been doing, I think that all of these distilleries are now realizing, wait a minute, what have we been doing? We certainly have not been doing it the right way. And if we look at market share, and we look at the infusion of global distilleries now descending upon the United States, we got to do things better. And we've got to recognize where's the core of our revenue. And the revenue source is right within a general area. I need to start there. So anyway, I'm done. I want to say thank you. And if there's anything you can do, please let me know. I appreciate everyone's support. And I thank all of those that voted for me to be in the Hall of Fame, because that was totally unexpected. But it
well deserved.
made me proud. It made me proud. So Fred, thank you so much. I'm done.
Oh, Freddie, we could talk all day. You know that. I love you, man. That was beautiful. That really was beautiful. And in 20 years, I'm looking forward to sitting down with you and talking about how things have changed over, I don't know, what Buffalo Trace product are you picking for us to sip on for that conversation? Putting them on the spot here, folks.
I think right now we need to go with the new dog on the trail, and that's the single barrel.
Okay. All right. I look forward to that. It's pretty good, by the way. That's pretty good.
Oh, yes. And I would like, I think that it would be kind of cool if we're not going to do a table, but to sit around with like the Fawn and other folks that have.
I think we lost Freddie. Uh-oh. Well, see, that's what happens. Mark Brown finds out he's talking about some kind of secret from Buffalo Trace, and Mark came in and cut off the internet so we wouldn't find out about the new the new cinnamon flavored Weller or something like that.
Oh gosh. But thanks so much, man. Yeah, I think a toast together at some point would be great.
I'd love that. Dr. Michael Torrence, you've been sitting there very patiently, and there's a very, very important reason why you're here. You're the president of Motlow State, and you are educating the future of tomorrow. And I believe in my heart that nobody knows what society looks like better than an educator, or the society of tomorrow looks like better than an educator. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the movement in improving diversity at the collegiate level right now?
Well, I have to start off by thanking the indomitable Fawn Weaver for allowing me to be participatory with this group. You all are amazing. Chris, I went to school at South Dakota State University, and I'm very close with the cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, as my closest friend lives in Burnsville. Another lives in the St. Paul area and is an EMS and firefighter, as well as some other folks around Edina, Minnetonka, and Apple Valley. So my heart goes out to what's happening where you are and around your home. In terms of education, I guess it's important for me to start with, we just heard from an elder. And that's really important in terms of you can't move away from who you are to lead, because you lead from what you've seen. And obviously, a Hall of Famer such as Mr. Johnson has led us. And we're talking about education, but this has begun and started with those who've come before me. And I have a phrase that I'll lead with, and that is, elders whisper into our ears while we slept, of making truths conscious. So as you marinate on that, listeners, think about the future. That's what I work with every day, from poor people to people who are very well off, Black people, white people, Asian, Latinos, the whole melting pot of what makes America what it is. And that is the land of opportunity, that if you believe in the platitude that there is not a ceiling or a roof, then you can become and be whatever it is that you think of yourself as. And this conversation with this esteemed panel is an example of that you can actually envision where you need to be to have the impact on society. So in higher education, I would say that we continue to always walk in a path that we can do better. And that's one of our phrases: we can do better every day, be better every day. From the training that needs to take place, not just with the faculty status, but also with the staff and the administrators, but most importantly with our students. If we don't build and design what they should be learning about and learning from, then we're doomed to repeat what's happening now. And these conversations are critical, as Freddie has mentioned, that yes, I hope that we do have a conversation 20 years from now to see where we are. I can tell you that I've been involved in higher education for 20 years already, and we have made great strides to move forward from where we were in the late 1900s, such as 1999 when I graduated from college. So it looks a lot different. Thinking about leadership in higher education, from my office across all the way over to the facilities workers, everybody's important. And this is a part of that dialogue, that within higher education, within business and industry, within the spirits industry, communication and voice are as much present today as it has ever been. When people don't feel that they have a platform to stand upon, then us who are on this call, those who are watching, we need to prepare one for them, and not just give them one, but prepare one for them. And Chris has been blessed by having such stewards in his corner, such as Fawn and Freddy and Melvin, who are saying to him, we will support you. So that's preparing the platform, not just giving the platform. So in education, what we're looking for now is making sure that it is an intentional and conscious conversation that includes everybody. So equity, diversity, inclusion is not just a spin-off or an add-on conversation to be discussed ad nauseum. It is a part of the fiber and the fabric that is interwoven between human beings. And at the end of the day, as much as I believe that Chris is a hero, and that Fawn is a hero, and that Melvin is a hero, that Freddie's a hero, that Trace is a hero, it's because when you are heroic, it means that you have the foresight and the vision to pivot from what you do every day to do something that's in the betterment of others. So this is about production for them, right? So they pivoted on their production to provide hand sanitizer. They pivoted on their production to provide access to foodstuffs for people who are impacted by bad times. So within education, it is an important facet of where we're going and where we are, that the conversation is just a conversation. So as I'm talking to people about say something, I also want them to not only say something, I want you to do something. I want you to move from conversation and story to being action-oriented and to create platforms that are preparing people for success. So I believe that that's the crux of what we do here at Motlow State. I believe that's what educators do. I think that's what leaders do, irrespective of what domain you're in. But that's very, very important to us here in Southern Middle Tennessee, that we're preparing people to be successful. Prosperity is a necessity for people not to want to go at each other's throats. We don't support violence. We don't support destroying property that belongs to other people. What we support is creative and conscious conversations that must be had in order for us to all grow. Because when you don't know, you can't grow. And when you can't grow, you do the same things over and over again. So we will continue to get better. We will come out of this on the other end. And I'm very thankful for the platform to share just a few of my thoughts about where we are, what we're doing now, but more so where we're going and who we're preparing to be successful.
Well, Dr. Torrence, you know, your words are, you know, it's one thing, you know, to talk and come out and say things, and it's another thing to do something about it. And one of the things that everybody at home watching this or listening can do right now is to go to that GoFundMe page at the top of the comment section, or go to Dunord's Facebook page, where you will find information about how to donate money to help the businesses there. You know, that Chris Montana, his Dunord Spirits, and his fellow business owners in that area, how they've been impacted. Please go donate money. But also, this is a call out to everybody. This is a call out to anybody who has a platform, and anybody in the whiskey industry or music industry, anything, all the various things I'm associated with. If you have a platform in any way, shape, or form, I encourage you to do something similar to what I did here today. We need to have these conversations. We need to have these conversations. We need to take action from these conversations. We need that hope. We need it. Because if we don't have that, if we let other people who don't agree with what America is, in terms of like how we are unified, we are a melting pot, we are a diverse group of people. If we allow others to dictate us to like spread hate and push those types of things, I don't know what America looks like. But I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to do every single thing that I can to talk about diversity, to talk about improving it, to give hope. I mean, you have somebody right here, Chris Montana. He could be screaming from the top of the roof about what's happened to him. Well, he's not. He is, but he's doing something about it. He's helping others. And that's all anybody here wants. That's all anyone here wants. Everybody, I didn't know how this would go when Fawn and I were kind of putting this together. I just know I can't sit back and not do anything. But I love all you all. I love every one of you. And I'm going to drink Chris's vodka. I'm really going to do it. And if you all don't know how much I hate vodka, there's a sign right behind me. I covered it up. But I do hate vodka. But I'm going to drink Chris's vodka, and it will be my very first actual legitimate review that's not just making fun of vodka. But we're at a crossroads in our country. And good people can stand up, or we can remain silent. I hope everyone who's out there takes a moment to stand up and do what's right. Fawn, Tracy, Freddy, Chris, Clay, Dr. Torrence, and I think my new best friend, Melvin Keebler, because he's gonna give me some of those good barrels that Jeff Arnett's been hiding from me after this call. But I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for coming on. I believe in every one of you, and I believe in the change that is to come. But we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do. So let's get to it.
Let's get to it.
Thank you.
Sounds like a plan.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, Fred.
Cheers.
Thank
Cheers,
you all so
guys.
much.
Cheers.
Be
Thank
safe
you.
out there.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
There we go. That was pre-recorded around 2 o'clock today. And I hadn't met many of those people on there, and it was special. And it was special because everybody has the same vision and desire and hope that we come out of this, that we come off onto the other side, and we're better for it. Change is coming. Change is coming because good people are standing up and demanding it. And that hope is something we can all look forward to. In the whiskey world, yeah, we talk about having whiskey. Yeah, I give tasting notes, and we do all of these events. But when it comes down to it, it's always about the people. It's always about the people. So as we go on to the battle ahead, to the conversations ahead, grab a nice glass of whiskey, sit down with someone, talk to someone over Zoom or in person when you can, and let's have some conversations. But that's going to do it for me tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Please be safe out there. Please be safe. And you're going to find the donation link in the comment section. So make sure you're clicking that donation link. I saw in the chat that we were close to $150,000 through the 3 various GoFundMes, and let's get that limit. Let's light that GoFundMe up. So go click that GoFundMe in the comment section. Thank you all for joining me. If you'd like to hang out some more, click the subscribe button. I'm not going away, and I'm certainly going to be doing more of this stuff because I want to. Cheers, everybody. Be safe.